hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Yay! So I think this is the first in a series of best and worst of blank genre of 2018 videos you guys are going to see from me. I decided to do this because I read a lot. I read a lot of books in a year. By the time 2018 is over, I will probably have read more than 250 books. And I feel like just picking a top 10 would not be fully representative of the good things I read this year. Like, it's one thing to pick a top 10 if you read even 100 books. Like, that's 10%. If I only picked 10 books from 250, that would be, like 3%? Like a very small percentage. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that I was giving shout outs to subgenres like romance, which is what we're going to talk about today, is a great example. It is rare for a romance to be so good that it would make like the 10 best books I read in a year kind of a list. It doesn't mean that I didn't read books that were really good in that genre. It's just that like romance, mystery, fantasy, all of them, I think sometimes just have a hard time competing with some of the like heavier hitters that I read because I do read so much. It's like, well, how do I compare like some really good, like a really good paranormal romance against like a history of American racism that was really good? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just sort of hard to figure that out. Like, you try to do best of breed, but then making those comparisons can sometimes just be a little difficult. So anyway, all that to say, I wanted to make sure that I was calling out, like, you guys have already seen like my series, best and worst series tag that I did, and now I'm doing my genre ones, and it's just because I want to make sure I'm reflecting like things that were really, really good in their genre. They just may not be like the best of the best because I read so much. So anyway, all that to say, I'm calling this my best and worst. Really, this should probably be like my favorites and disappointments because like it's hard to make those kind of quality comparisons in any very objective sense. But anyway, I think you guys take my meaning when I say best and worst. So today's video is specifically about the romance genre, the best and the worst. Now, I will tell you, when I was going through, I did read a lot of romance this year. It's one of my number one sort of like filler books, like palate cleanser kind of things. This was not a particularly great year for me in romance reading. Like, notably worse than the last couple of years. Like, I definitely had things by the time I made the list that I was like, oh yeah, that is really good. But there was a lot of 3 stars in romance reading for me this year, like a lot. So it was a little hard to pick things that I felt like merited to be on a list like this. But I did, by the time it was said and done, I came out to exactly 10. So it worked out very nicely. So we're going to go through those 10, and then I will also tell you about my disappointments. And yeah, we'll wrap up my year of reading romance together. Number 10 was Courtly Scandals by Erin, Kane, Spock. This was a book that I got as an ARC. I remember Redheaded Girl had mentioned that this author wrote her favorite Elizabethan historical romances, which is an era of historical romance I haven't read a lot of, but really like the idea of. I think basically because I love The Perilous Guard by Elizabeth Marie Pope so much, which is one of my favorite YA books ever from back in the day. But anyway, so I was like, oh, okay, like I like that idea. And then I read it and I really enjoyed it. It was really well written, had like surprisingly some very spicy sex scenes that I thought were handled very nicely. And I liked that it was essentially a story about sort of like outcasts and like people who are sort of on the fringes of court life and why they're on the fringes, and sort of, you know, 2 people who felt a lot of rejection finding each other. It definitely had sort of a 21st century sensibility in terms of like gender roles, which is something that I like in my historical romances. I don't want them to be historically accurate. Like, I can go read classics if that's what I'm looking for. If you've seen my videos about historical romance, you know that I have very strong feelings about an over prioritization on quote unquote historical accuracy. I think what you're actually looking for is historical verisimilitude, and that would solve a lot of the diversity issues we have in historical romance. Anyway, that's a whole thing. So I liked the kind of sensibilities that this brought to it. It reminded me of something, you know, kind of the same paradigm as something like a Tessa Dare or a Courtney Milan, who I really like in historical romance. Yeah, anyway, this was a new author to me. I think that the publisher may have closed, so she may be looking for a new publisher, and I hope she finds one because I really enjoyed this book and would definitely recommend it as a different kind of historical romance than a lot of the Regency Victorian stuff that we get. Number 9 is No Surprise. Oh, I should mention that we will be in 4, all of these are 4 stars except for the very top. So all of these that we're talking about are 4-star books. This is No Surprise, number 9, because it is the 3rd in a series that I really love from an author who I think is doing some of the best contemporary romance writing today. Like, I just really like her books, and they're very recommendable because they're not sex heavy. So for people who that's a barrier for, I think Lucy Parker is a great person to go to, and the book I'm talking about is Making Up by Lucy Parker. All of her the series she's writing in right now, they're all set in the West End theater scene in London, so it's between like directors and actors, or actors and stagehands, or like in this case the heroine is a aerial performer, like a acrobatist. I'm not sure. It's sort of like in a Cirque du Soleil type show. And the hero is like a professional makeup artist. And yeah, it was just a really great character dynamic, which is a recurring theme, what you will hear a lot of. Like, they used to know each other and didn't like each other, and now they're like falling in love because they're in a show together, kind of a thing. It's just like, it was really well executed. I love that these books always have a lot about like the professional lives of the characters. I really enjoy that. I really like something like a Face Off, so I enjoyed that the hero was like that kind of professional makeup artist and was like doing kind of like special effects makeup stuff. That was really cool. Yeah, it was just a super good book all around, and not a surprise because Lucy Parker like knows how to deliver. Number 8 is Hurts to Love You by Aisha Ray. And I've been waiting to find a book description that sounded like it was going to connect for me, because people who read romance love Aisha Ray. She's like one of the most popular, like, emerging voices of contemporary romances. She does write a lot of like more erotic things that are just not like, I'm just not as into like the more erotic end of things. I'm fine with like a high heat level, but when it gets into like some of the kink stuff, that's just not what I personally enjoy reading in a romance. Finally, I found a description of a book that I was like, yes, I think that I would like this. It was the third in a trilogy, and I have not read the first two in the trilogy, but I would tell you it works just fine as a standalone. This is essentially about two people who are coming, like the whole trilogy is about these two families who used to own a business together, and then there was like this big falling out, and like different love stories that are kind of bringing healing to that entire situation. And this is the trilogy, so a lot of things are coming to a head in it. I really, really like the family dynamics in this. The romance itself actually didn't work as well for me, but I felt like she bought it back with the last few chapters in terms of like jumping forward in time and yada, yada, yada. It was just really, really good, and I'm glad that I had a positive first experience with Aisha Ray, because I would really like to read more from her. She's a really compelling writer in this genre. I think she has really nice prose and writes really emotionally complex characters, which I definitely appreciate. Number 7 is a real surprise to me, because this is my highest ranked historical romance. Almost everything going forward is contemporary. Also, this was the year of contemporary for me. Usually I do like more paranormal or urban fantasy or fantasy romance, but I didn't read a lot of that I love this year. And I like some historical romance, but it's not always my favorite. So this is my highest ranked historical romance. It is also what I would essentially say a fanfic of Pride and Prejudice. It's like an alternative, like, what if of Pride and Prejudice. So it features Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, which is like a big red flag. Normally I'm like way not into this, but I'd seen I forget who, but somebody had written a review who I trust their taste, and they were like, this is actually pretty good. I read it and I was like, oh, this is far and away the best of that subgenre of like rewriting Pride and Prejudice I've ever read. And basically the premise is, what if Elizabeth had said yes to Mr. Darcy the first time he proposes? What would have happened? And I thought this did a really nice job of like, it didn't try to recreate Austen prose, which I think was smart. It puts you in the head of both Darcy and Elizabeth in a way that I thought was really compelling. And I just genuinely found this to be a well-executed, well-written historical romance that like was taking a lot of things we love about Pride and Prejudice. The author struck a really nice balance between paying homage and like giving us enough from the original text to make it feel like it was a part of that world, without having the aspiration of actually trying to write like Jane Austen. Like, I thought that was handled in a really nice balance. Did I even say the name of this? It's Unequal Affections by Lara Ormiston. So yeah, like, I think it's like the best historical romance I've ever read? No, but I was very impressed in terms of like the project of this book is the most successful execution of that project that I've ever seen from an author, if that makes sense. I was like, okay, I think you successfully kind of threaded a needle that I've never seen anyone else thread to my satisfaction before. So like, kudos on that. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I thought it made me think about the characters from the original in a new way, which is part of what I enjoyed about it. Okay, number 6 is kind of a cheat because I didn't pick one. I picked a little series, but my favorite novellas this year were the Rothman Royals series from Noelle Adams. I talk about Noelle Adams on here a lot in terms of romance as an author I think doesn't get enough credit for doing like interesting work in contemporaries. She always has, like, she writes almost entirely novellas. She is one of those authors who actually understands how to write a novella because she knows how to pick a conflict that fits in a novella. These actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure that they technically were novellas. They're very short novels, I think. And basically she's playing on the idea of a series of mostly 3 princesses and 1 prince who are getting paired off over the course of the series. And I just really enjoyed this. This is what I like in terms of very light contemporary romances. I like that the conflicts are never just people being dumb. I really like the ability of the characters in her books to have complicated emotional conversations in a way that I like. I like that her sex scenes are more on the realistic side of things and therefore are often used to actually progress character development, which normally, honestly, in romance, I skim a lot of sex scenes because it's very like tab A into slot B. It's like once you've read a few of these, they're pretty similar. I actually read her sex scenes because there's always like interesting things happening between the characters aside from the sex. Like they're always having interesting conversations or like whatever. So anyway, this I think was my favorite like short novel little series of the year. I'm not sure if they actually were novellas now that I'm thinking about it. I put it on here as novellas, but they may not actually be. But anyway, I just really enjoyed them as light romance with kind of a few tropes I really like in terms of like an arranged marriage, friends to lovers, all that kind of stuff. So it had tropes I liked and it had Noelle Adams's like signature style that I really enjoy. Number 5 is the one and only kind of like urban fantasy / paranormal romance / like fantasy romance pick on here. And that is Silver Silence by Nalini Singh. I literally read this yesterday, so it's a late addition to the list, but it was really good. This is 4 stars. At the beginning when I was reading this, I was like, this is going to be a 5-star book because it had so many elements I really liked in it. I do think it got a little flabby, and I think that it's broken into 2 parts. The first part is about 300 pages. The second part is 150 pages. I think about 5 scenes from the first part should have been cut and about 2 or 3 scenes should have been added to the second part. And this may have been a 4.5 or a 5-star book. The Side Changeling series is one of the things I most recommend to people who are new to romance, who are looking to get into it, because yes, each book is unquestionably a romance. There's a new couple getting together in each book. This is book number 16. So we've encountered 16 couples plus all the side couples from the novellas. So it's unquestionably a romance. However, there is an overarching political machination, urban fantasy, or like alternative future plot happening that is really interesting. Like genuinely, there's a lot of like political intrigue, and that's what a lot of the conflict comes from. So yes, there's always internal conflicts happening between the characters as they're getting together, but there's a lot of really compelling external conflict happening, which is what I like in romance in general. Like I'm usually either wanting a romance where there's like relationship external conflict, so like things happening with your family or whatever, or there's like bigger like mystery plots or fantasy plots or whatever, and then there's romance thrown in. Basically, I mean, we're 16 books in, so I don't want to spoil anything. I'll just say in terms of tropes, this is a hero in hot pursuit. Heroine has a secret that she knows has to keep them apart, and then they have to work together to overcome that. So this was just super good. This is a book with a Psy heroine and a changeling hero, which I think often are some of the more successful ones, like in terms of the different elements in these series. This is like set in near future, I think like in 2080-ish. And it posits a world in which there are shapeshifters who are called changelings. There's a bunch of different like animals they can change into. There's them. There's this group called the Psy, who essentially have a bunch of different types of like psychic powers in terms of like telepathy or telekinesis, things like that. And then there are humans. And so it's essentially a book about like the 3 groups having come to a certain kind of political arrangement between the species. And then in the first 14 books of this series, that gets reconfigured. The little arc that we're in right now is sort of the fallout from all the changes that happened. And then I think we're going to enter another new arc here in a couple of books. So it's a really interesting series that I love. And this was a good installment in it. 4 stars. I really enjoyed the series and was excited to get finally to start catching up on it and to get an installment that I enjoyed so much. Okay, number 4 is Remedial Rocket Science by Susannah Nix. I decided to put this so high up on the list because this is probably the new adult novel that I have most enjoyed of any that I've ever read. And that is because it did not have like a default sexual assault backstory. I get so sick of that when I try to read new adult. Pick a different way to have angst, people. But that's the other thing. As we were discussing, I don't like high angst in my romance, really in any book. The only time I can put up with high angst is in like literary fiction, to be totally honest with you. Otherwise, I get a little impatient with it. So usually new adult has a lot of angst, and it often does have that backstory, which I don't like. This book I really enjoyed because it had a much lighter touch to it. It wasn't super angsty. I also felt like it actually was reflective of actual conflicts that new adults have. So new adult is supposed to have protagonists between, let's say, 20 to 25. When that genre first emerged as a new way to sell us books, by the way, when that genre first emerged, I actually was new adult age. And I remember reading it and being like, this is not what people my age actually are dealing with. Where is like crippling social anxiety in these books? Like, that's a much more realistic conflict, which actually is a part of what this book has. But that's what I liked about it. I felt like it had actual conflicts that reflect challenges of being that age in terms of figuring out like what your boundaries are in relationships, who you even want to be, like you're starting your career and kind of trying to figure out who you are in that context. What does it look like to make friends as an adult? Like, that's a part of what this book deals with. Like, all of those things I found much more realistic. I did like the overall tropes it was playing with in terms of like friends to lovers. And I really like that the whole series is essentially about women in STEM professions. So like, this is the first in a series, and I've read the next two and enjoyed them as well, but it's women who are like computer scientists or engineers or doctors. Like, I like that as well. So anyway, all that to say, this is, I think, my favorite new adult book I've ever read, and for that reason I wanted to kind of put it up higher on the list. She's also an author, I think, that is starting to get some recognition, but she's newer, so I would definitely go check out Susannah Nix. I've read 3 of her books so far and really enjoyed all of them. I think if what I'm describing sounds good to you, she's definitely worth giving a try. Okay, number 3 was this year's big romance breakout title into the mainstream of people who don't think that they like romance, but you know, if you give them a non-embarrassing cover, or if you're a man who wrote Crazy Rich Asians, people will buy them and don't fully realize that they are romances. So that was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. The other one, I haven't read The Wedding Date yet, but that was sort of like the other big breakout mainstream title this year. The Kiss Quotient was really, really good. If this had not had the sex worker client trope in it, I probably would have given this a 4.5 or 5 star. This handles that trope the best I've ever seen, but for me, I always just have like lingering ickiness about the power dynamics at play. However, I do think that Helen Hoang did a really great job of trying to make it a more even playing field in terms of like who had the emotional power in the relationship. So the economic aspects of it were less troubling to me. I just struggle with that trope in general. But putting all that to the side, I love the family dynamics. I really like the characters and I really like their romance and them like coming together. I enjoyed it. It's just a super good book and very easy to recommend to people because it was a big title this year and it, I think, really does live up to the promise. I've recommended to a couple of friends who don't normally read romance and they've all really enjoyed it. So yeah, Kiss Quotient is coming in at number 3, both because it's like reminding people that romance is a genre that they can enjoy and don't need to feel embarrassed about, and because it was just like a super good book all around. Like, I really enjoyed my time reading it. Coming in the number 2 slot, and these are my highest ranked 4-star books, were Neanderthal Seeks Human and Love Hacked by Penny Reid, which are 2 installments in her Knitting in the City series. And I'd picked both of them because I like them pretty much the same. And I really like that little series that she has going. I think I've read 4 or 5 now in that series. It's just really good. And Penny Reid is somebody who I'd seen recommended to me a lot of like, oh, if you like Mariana Zapata, if you like Kristen Ashley, if you like romantic comedy type contemporaries, you should definitely give Penny Reid a try. Totally agree with that. There's something very crackalicious about her writing, so they're very bingeable books. I like the kind of friendship elements in them. I like the tropes that she seems to be playing with. I read the first in the Winston Brothers series spinoff, which is Beauty and the Mustache, which is in this series, but it's also the first in the next. I liked it. I mean, it's a series that I really enjoyed. It's my favorite new romance series I found this year, and I'm looking forward to catching up with more of her backlist. Just, if you like something that's very kind of like crackalicious and contemporary romance, like a lot of rom-com kind of elements to them, I think you'll like these, and they definitely lived up to the hype for me this year. So I really enjoyed both of those books. Okay, so before we talk about my number 1 favorite for the year, let me run through some disappointments. Now, there were 2, but really 3, but romance books on my worst books of the year list. So first was Rogue Stallion by Diana Palmer. Duh, it was not good. You can see my video, my worst of the year video / my bookstore picks my TBR video to get some insight into why that was not a good book. And then Twice Bidden and Vampires Like It Hot by Lindsay Sands were both on my worst of the year list, just because they are the ones that finally got me to stop reading the Argent Vampires series in terms of like when they first come out. So those were on the worst. 5 other ones that were just disappointing to me. So I had 2 DNFs. One was Man Card by Sarina Bowen. the humor in it was just really off. I thought was really juvenile and unreadable, to be honest. And then With Everything I Am by Kristen Ashley, I tried to get through that one. Kristen Ashley is a very hit or miss author for me. This was a paranormal Kristen Ashley, and I really could not get into it. I tried to skip ahead and read the ending, was like, oh, this is terrible. So that definitely was on my disappointment list. Wishing for Us, which was also in that Bookstore Picks My TBR, it disappointed me just because it had a lot of tropes that I should have liked. Like, it had like a fake marriage kind of trope in a contemporary. And yeah, I just had real problems with the execution on that one. The Art of Running in Heels by Rachel Gibson, that might have been my most disappointing romance of the year, just because I've always heard such great things about Rachel Gibson, but like, it was very weirdly paced. I didn't like the authorial voice, and then like it was very old school in its gender attitudes, but it was written this year. So I'm wondering if Rachel Gibson is just a romance author. She's, was big. She's been big for the last like 10 to 20 years. So I wonder if she's just like not keeping up with the times. I don't know, but that I did not enjoy. And then finally, When She Said I Do by Celeste Bradley was my least favorite historical romance I read this year. Not that I read a ton of them, but I didn't like it. I thought that it was really very inconsistent in its characterization. It wasn't fun. I think it thought it was having fun and like having a light touch, but I didn't think it actually came off that well, so it just didn't work very well for me. Now that we've done all of those and my disappointments, let's talk about my favorite. And I've been talking about this book a lot this year, so this is probably not a surprise, but it was The Ones Who Got Away by Roni Loren. I gave this 4.5 stars. This is unquestionably my favorite romance I read this year. The premise of this little trilogy that she's doing, and I'm not sure if there's going to be more. I have an arc of the third one that I'm about to read. The premise is there was a mass shooting at a high school prom about 10 years ago. And the survivors of that shooting come together for like a memorial thing. And from there, start reconnecting with each other. And then we start following them as they get into these various relationships. The Ones Who Got Away is the first book in the little trilogy. It is about two people who were actually together the night of the shooting and sort of like how each of them reacted in that moment, how it impacted each other and their own lives. And now they're trying to come back together and move forward from there. And I just thought that Roni Loren did a surprisingly really nice job of handling what is a very sensitive subject matter. I thought she handled the shooting, like the reactions to the shooting and like PTSD, all of those kinds of things in a way that was really respectful and credible, which I think for commercial fiction is like what you're going for. Like, I think for commercial fiction, this handled a very heavy topic really well, basically. I thought that she handled that subject matter really well. I really liked all of the emotional dynamics that were happening, because this book is a lot about like what you do in the moment of something and how that affects who you become, and whether or not, like, how we hold each other accountable for our past actions or how we move forward from those. Like, I really liked all of that. And then I thought that the actual romance at the heart of it was really satisfying, and I really liked the way she brought it together at the end. So I just thought this was an excellent example of commercial fiction, like one of my favorite pieces of commercial fiction I read this year for sure. It was just really, really well handled. I also just really like that this book, because it's a romance and because you know there's going to be a happy ending, I like the idea of having books that involve victims of mass shootings or things that like just horrifying events that shows them having the ability to move forward and having hope in a positive way. I think that that's just positive and something that is worth celebrating in this world, that, you know, dark things happen, but then we can also have hope that good can eventually return to someone's life. And I think is a really important kind of countermeasure to heavy things. And like, I would love to see romance diving into some of these topics even more, because to me, the function of romance in my reading diet is it's the thing I can consistently know is going to give me a positive ending that has some hope to it. And I would love to see, like, because there's always heavy shit happening in the world. And I love that this potentially can represent a place where fiction authors can move in and provide hopefulness in dark subject matter. And I think that this did a really good job of that. And I would love to think that it represents maybe a trend of like something that romance writers can do for the reading community writ large, which is provide kind of a hopeful voice in the midst of very dark topics. After I just got philosophical all up in your girl, those were my best and worst romances of 2018. I know romance is not something that everybody reads, but it's important to me to be a visible reader of romance in the booktube community because you guys are as likely to see me reading Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man as you are to see me reading like a holiday Christmas romance. Like, I am an omnivore, I read it all, and I want to be somebody who is visible in talking about romance in a critical way because it is a much maligned genre, and I want to make sure that I'm doing my part to rep and talk about the ways that I think it needs to be destigmatized and frankly the like underlying misogyny that kind of comes with a lot of this critique. So I know that this probably is not a video for all of my viewers, but for those of you who do read romance, I hope you enjoyed it. Even if you don't, I hope maybe you thought this was interesting or were interested to learn what I do like about it or what I don't like about it. So anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. Buckle up because we got several more of these best and worst of lists coming. That's pretty much most of what's happening for the rest of this month. So I hope you're ready, and I guess I will just talk to you then. Bye!